Okay, week 2 of 4 weeks of this. Week 2, I want to talk about kind of a painful one. This is like, I don't know, this one, I feel like this messes with people, and it gets like real wonky in terms of, how can I say this? Different people have different opinions about this, and obviously part of what you're getting here is mine. And I am basing this on kind of lived experience. Like this is sort of the way that I experience some of today's topic, and the way that I see guys experience today's topic. I think there's a part of this, you're seeing my wheels turn. I think there's a part of this that like people can get really polarized about, and this is back to opinions. People can get really polarized about this, like it's got to be one way or the other. And I don't know. I think it's a little more. I think the lines are a little more blurry than clear in some ways on this. So let's jump in, and then I'll explain that as we go. We finished a little bit early last time. I wonder if we'll finish a little bit early today. Here we go. Our starting point, back to the basics kind of framework, is this: that our belief about who God is calling us to be, speaking for husbands here, I think the same thing holds true for wives in many ways, but for husbands, our belief about who God is calling us to be will ultimately inform how far our relational recovery goes. It'll inform how far our personal recovery goes as well, because the two are linked. We know that one informs the other. But I think sometimes people get kind of tangled up in this web, and again, I say there's opinions about this, and people have kind of polarized ideas around this. I think we kind of get tangled up in this web of like relational recovery is the net effect of the tools that I'm using and the way that I apply them and the work that I'm doing and this kind of thing. And while there's some truth in those, at a granular tactical level, there's kind of a bigger picture at play. And that bigger picture is what we believe about what God is calling us to is going to make more of a difference than those other things. And I want to speak to some of those other things, okay? So if you're lost, I'll try my best to make it clear before we're done. So first, what a lot of people believe is that boundaries, consequences, and rewards are what will inform how far our recovery goes. And I just want to say, I think boundaries are really important. Shelley does boundaries classes. Like that's a huge thing. And boundaries are like, I mean, if you've ever read the Boundaries book, first of all, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I was telling somebody the other day, years ago, I was on radio with Cloud individually and then Townsend individually. And there were moments in those radio sessions where I was just like, I was sitting in my chair just like, holy cow, a little bit starstruck, but also just blown away with their wisdom, their, thinking on their toes, like the way that they articulated things. They're coming up with stuff where I'm sitting there going like, how could you possibly even have come up with that? They were really special folks. Very, very nice folks too. So I'm a huge fan of boundaries. Sometimes there are consequences that a wife has to enforce. Sometimes just the nature of our choices bring consequences. Sometimes there's a reward in the form of, bettering our relationship or the feedback that we get from outside or inside or other people. And I would say all of those are not going to ultimately inform. They're not going to ultimately inform how far our relational recovery goes. What we believe God is calling us to will ultimately inform that. These may have periodic, brief motivations, and we're going to talk about motivations in a second. They might have, moments where they accelerate our work, but at the end of the day, that's not going to be what drives us forward. What we really believe about what God is calling us to or not is going to inform that. Okay, and so if I take that to thinking about motivations, our motivation changes. Here again, this is where people people get really opinionated about this. And it's like, you know, if your wife is your motivation, it's not going to work. Okay, well, okay, you got to be motivated internally. So, internal. If you're not doing this for Jesus, then that's an R. Then this isn't going to work, God. Actually, let me draw that a little bit differently, because I'll just represent kind of how I see this happen. So wife, internal, God. Sometimes it's just an external force. It's like our family or our kids or our, you know, it's just an external force. And there could be more. And people will say things like, well, if it's not this, then it's that, then it won't work, and da-da-da-da. And the reality is, like, at 3:30 today, I'm just here because my wife said I got to move out if I don't show up. And by 4 o'clock today, I could walk away with an internal motivation where I'm kind of going, yeah, you know, I do want to change. I don't want to be the same guy I've been. And then at dinner, you ping pongs down here and you're going, I don't really care. I don't really want to change, but I know God is calling me to change. And so I'm going to keep doing this thing. I'm going to do my devotions. I'm going to do my step work. I'm going to do the homework the guys gave me this evening, whatever. And it turns over here. And then there are moments where you wake up, you know, 3 days from now and you go, I'm really only here because of my kids. And the motivation changes. And I'm going to say, my opinion, I don't care which one it is on any given day. I really don't. If this is what's motivating you to show up and do work today, fine. If this is what's causing you to show up and do work today, fine. I'm okay with that. But ultimately, all of these will give way. Right? Doing this because God expects it of me, that's going to give way. That's different than what I believe God is calling me to. I'll explain that in a second. If I'm just doing this because I'm sort of like under God's thumb and he's demanding it of me, I think that'll give way eventually. I think if I'm doing this just because I want my life to be different, I think eventually that'll give way. Either because the level of effort that it takes to continue to grow will outpace you, will outpace your motivation, meaning like what got you here won't get you there kind of thing. At some point, what's expected of you and what it takes of you to grow will outpace your internal motivation to grow. I think at some point, winning our wives back will wear off. I think at some point, our kids will grow and leave the house and it won't be about them anymore. I think all those things will ultimately give way. In the interim, as long as they're not ultimate, I don't care which one it is today. Because if it motivates you to show up and do work, we're going to get somewhere. But ultimately, our belief about who God is calling us to be isn't about being under God's thumb. It's not out of obedience and demanding. This, who God is calling me to us to be, this is about love. It's about love. When we start to see that I'm in a place that I am being asked to change and there's something trying to be developed in me, and you start to see that this is because the God of the universe cares about you. The God of the universe wants to make you more, fill in the blank with theology word you want to fill in with. When you start to see, like, this is about who the God of the universe who loves me and cares enough about me to want me to change, when you start to internalize that, it changes how you show up. That will carry you. Whereas ultimately these won't. In the interim, they will, but ultimately they won't. Okay? I hear well-meaning folks. Let me just say, I have heard. I haven't been to a group lately, but I used to hear well-meaning folks in group use this one all the time. Or counselors, hanging out with a bunch of counselors, some therapists and coaches. I would hear that all the time. Like, your wife can't be your motivation. Your wife can't be your motivation. I'll just tell you my story. There's a season where in the beginning, the very early days, a lot of my motivation was Shelley. It just was. There was a period where some of my motivation was what other people thought. What are my parents going to think? But like, that was some motivation. There was a season where later, years down the road, I'm doing this out of obligation and obedience. Like, there's some element of what I'm doing that is like, I don't have another choice. I wasn't showing up and clicking my heels and like, yippee, ready to do recovery work. There was like duress around it, right? And, a lot of people, though, it's like, well, that's bad and wrong. Well, I disagree. It just is. It's just how it works, man. It's just like, if you get into the gritty, raw places of recovery, these ebb and flow, and you can ping pong between any of them on any given day and any given moment, okay? At the end of the day, and ultimately, this will be what informs how far you go, okay? Let's keep going. This informs the question, or the answer to the question, what if she doesn't buy it? Why do it if she doesn't, why say it if she doesn't believe me? Why do it if she doesn't believe me? Why check in when she doesn't want to hear it? Because this is who God is calling me to be. Like, the answer to that question will be informed by your belief about who God is calling you to be. Because if you're not ultimately motivated by that, if you're not ultimately motivated by who God is calling you to be, you'll ask that question and go, well, then I won't. Why do it if she doesn't believe it? Then I won't do it. Why check in if she doesn't want to hear it? Then I won't. That'll answer that question. And I think about, Thomas and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday, kind of off topic, but connected, loosely connected. And we're just talking about how sometimes as husbands, we can be in this place where it's like, okay, we're in this raft, and it's sinking, right? There are holes in the raft, and we are like paddling toward shore, and we are like scooping with buckets trying to get the water out of the boat, and and we're trying to like patch up all the holes in the boat. And there are moments where we're kind of going like, why can't she see? Why can't she see how hard I'm working? Why can't she affirm how hard I'm working? Right? Can't she see that I'm paddling feverishly and I'm like scooping buckets and like, it doesn't make a difference. Why do it if it doesn't seem to make a difference? And the answer is because I'm not patching the boat and scooping water for her. I'm doing that on her behalf, but I'm not patching up this life raft because she needs me to. Patching up this life raft because I believe that's who God's calling me to be, is the kind of guy that scoops water, paddles like crazy, and patches up the raft. Like, I say this, and sometimes this can get interpreted and manipulated into something really like tacky and hurtful. It's, guys will say things like, well, I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it for me, I'm not doing it for her. And what they're really saying is like, there's a little bit of a screw you in that, right? There's a little bit of like, okay, you get the point. And there's a difference between, I'm not doing this for her, but I am doing this on her behalf. Like, I am moved by the fact that she doesn't buy it. I am moved by the fact that she doesn't believe me. I am moved by the fact that she says, don't talk to me. Or what? I am moved by those things, but at the end of the day, ultimately, am I doing those things for her or on her behalf? Because if I'm doing them for her, then when they don't seem to work, I'm just going to be mad at her. I'm just going to be like bitter and resentful that it's not working. Versus when I'm doing the things on her behalf, some of the things, listen, let's just delineate a couple things here real quick. There's a difference between for and behalf. There are some things that we as husbands are doing on our wife's behalf because she has requested it. If she had not requested it, we would not be doing. And we're doing them willingly, gladly, sincerely, hopefully, we're doing them out of the right place on her behalf, not for her, because we're under her thumb and they'll be held to pay if we don't, but we're doing them for her or on her behalf. It's like there's this thing that happens where, yeah, if she didn't request it, I wouldn't do it. But it's not because, how can I say this? For some of us, it's like if she said, hey, stop doing that today, we'd go, that's a relief. Glad to finally stop doing that. And it would have this sense of like, I was doing that resentfully anyway, and I'm glad that pain in the butt is out of here. Like, it has that essence to it, which is a tell that this isn't where you were coming from on that. Versus when we're doing things on her behalf and she says, hey, stop doing it. Usually in guys that are living out of this place, there's an anxiety that comes with that, not a relief. There's a little bit of like timidity that comes with that, not arrogance. There's like this place of like, are you sure? Because that was making a difference for you. That seemed to help you. Are you sure you don't want me to be doing that? Because that's a tell that I'm doing that on her behalf. I'm doing that because I believe I'm called to be the kind of person who does that on her behalf, not because she's making me do it. Victimhood versus what I'm going to call grateful grief. This is the difference. I believe this is the difference between victimhood and grateful grief. And here's what I mean by that. If you believe that God is calling you to become the kind of man who has patience and love and sacrifice and identity and self-control and fill in fruits of the Spirit and characteristics of Jesus, if you believe that God is calling you to that, then when things aren't going well, air quotes, well, relationally, you won't fall into victimhood. We fall into victimhood generally when our motivation is on an outcome, not a become. Okay? Meaning, it's not working. She doesn't see how hard I'm paddling or how much water I'm trying to get out of the boat or how hard I'm working to patch all these holes. Then it becomes victim-y. Like this, do you understand that this is hard for me too? I talk about this sometimes. I mean, this is so classically where I was when I was talking to my guys about divorcing Shelley. And we're going to talk about divorce in a minute too. This is so characteristic of where I was. I was in this victim place of going, do you know how hard this is for me? Do you know how hard it is to take the screaming, the yelling, the name calling, the blaming? Do you know how hard it is to be responsible for her freaking ice cream cone melting? For real? And I'm sitting there with those guys going, she's never going to stop yelling. She's never going to stop naming. She's never going to stop being angry. She's never going to, she can't move past this. And what I was really saying was like 80-20. 20% of me was like, I hate this for her. And 80% of this was like, I hate this for me. And I was in such a victim place. At that point, I'm going to counseling. I'm going to a couple of different groups. I'm like every day getting up early and doing devotions. I'm reading recovery material. I'm like, on some level, here's the covert narcissist in me. On some level, like I was crushing it in recovery, doing recovery, and I was sitting there at the table with these guys going, do you know? I'm working hard over here. I wasn't being ultimately motivated by this. I was being motivated by how this was going to turn out for me. I hope that makes sense. I wasn't motivated by who I was becoming. I was motivated by what I was doing and what the payoff was going to be, which I think is very common in the beginning of recovery. And by beginning, I mean early recovery, which doesn't have a timestamp on it. I think that's very common. And we also got to grow up. We all got to mature out of that too. Versus when you're operating out of the place where you believe who God is calling you to, and that change and that character development, that you believe that what God and who God is calling you to be is that kind of man. What you'll experience in those moments is what I'm going to call a grateful grief. If you talk to guys who have lived this out and they're later on in recovery, you'll hear guys say things like, "This is really hard, and I'm really sad, and I also know I need this. I also know there's work for me to do here. I also know there's something for me to grow in here." If you'll hear that, and there is a gratitude that God is not done with me. There is a gratitude that even though this is hard, I'm still in it. There's a gratitude that I'm becoming someone different, even though right in the middle of it, it's terrible. And that gratitude is paired with grief. And when I say grief, I'm thinking sadness and anger. There's a little bit of ping-ponging through there. There's a little bit of bargaining when it settles for a minute. And there's a hopelessness that can come with that. And it's there's a little bit of this going on. And the conversation ultimately settles at a place of, and this is good. And this is good. I don't mean like, yay, we're having a terrible weekend and we're in the middle of a blowout and we're completely off the rails. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, this is good is that place where we go, I hate this, and I know this is a place for me to grow. That is good. No, God is not done with me, and that is good. Okay? So it shows up in the difference between victimhood and what we'll call a grateful grief. Okay? Another indicator or another thing that's informed by that is this idea of letting off the gas. So there's this thing that happens where in a lot of guys' recoveries, we hit this place where like we're doing the deal and we're like checking the boxes. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean like, hey, we're doing the deal. We're like checking it off and we're getting it done and we're doing it with the right heart and the right spirit. And we're in the right place and we're living recovery, man. And things are going well relationally because of it. And we have a tendency to let off the gas at that point. And that's an indicator where our motivation is coming from. That's an indicator of like what's actually driving us. Because the letting off the gas tells us that, if you will, we're getting the reward for the work. Which in and of itself isn't bad. That's yes, there should be some payoff for the work. That's great. But it tells us that now that I'm getting what the thing is that I've been working for, I don't have to work as hard. Which means I'm less interested in who I'm becoming and more interested in what I'm getting as a result. Okay? Oftentimes when people talk about a wife especially, she'll say like, I just feel like, gosh, we get going and we get some consistency and some rhythm, and then I feel like he lets off the gas. And then if I don't get upset, throw up my hands, jump up and down and scream and yell, he doesn't get back on the gas. And it's only when I do that he does get back on the gas. And there can be a whole bunch of things that play into that, but my bias is that this is really ultimately what's driving that. Because when you're motivated by this, when this is what's driving you, no pun intended, driving in the gas, when this is what's driving you, you realize that the payoff, the reward, the redemption that we're experiencing is the beginning, not the end. You realize that there's more to be had, which motivates you. Doesn't mean you don't take a break and have to recharge a little bit. It means I want to work that much harder. I want to do that much. I want to gain that much more change in my life. I want to develop that much more in character. Because if this is part of what we're getting now, how much more can we get? How much more can there be in redemption in our story? Again, not as a reward. That's not, you understand, that's not the heart of it. It's like, I don't know, I'm going to beat a dead horse. Okay? So letting off the gas is an indicator that, hey, that's not where your motivation lies. It's coming from a little bit different place and maybe not the right place. Or maybe there's a conversation that you and God need to have to talk about this. Last thing, I think, again, my opinion, I think our belief about what God is calling us to is what allows us to entertain divorce. Speaking for husbands here. It's like there's I would expect most husbands, generally speaking, most husbands in the process of recovery, relational recovery, I would expect there to be a moment of having a thought of divorce. Having a thought of, it would be easier if we separate. It would be easier if I were gone. It would be easier if we divorced. Something to that effect. I would expect there to be a moment of thinking that. That's very different than entertaining the thoughts of divorce. And I believe if we're motivated, if we're driven by becoming all of who God is calling us to be, that we wouldn't allow ourselves, and we would ask for God's help when we're on the verge of entertaining divorce. To think it is one thing, to entertain it is a different thing. If I look at a handful of guys that I think about who have experienced redemption in their lives, there's not they don't entertain divorce when things get hard. Somewhere they crossed the line of not entertaining divorce anymore when things were hard. And here's the way that I think about that just personally at our house. I don't think that my role as a husband, and I'm thinking about this in the totality of relational recovery, meaning not just I've committed serial adultery, I'm talking about all the acting in, the intimacy aversion, all the relational betrayal stuff, the lies, the secrets, the meanness, the cutting comments, the sarcasm. I'm talking about all the relational stuff, not just the infidelity. When I think about my role at our house, I am disrespecting all of the times. I'm disrespecting all of Shelley's decisions to stay if I entertain thoughts of divorce. Right? She's made 157,000 decisions to stay. I'm making the number up, obviously. She didn't make one big decision and then it stuck. Right? She spent 2 decades continuing to make the decision to stay. Right? For me to entertain leaving would be to directly disrespect. It would be a slap in the face to all of the times that she said, I'm staying. Okay. So I think that about my role relative to our house. The second thing I think about is that raft, that life raft. Like I'm scooping water and I'm paddling and I'm patching that thing up. And today, 20 years later, there are fewer holes, right? There's less water in the bottom of that raft. In some ways, we've graduated to a better boat. And still, every metaphor breaks down. Maybe this one just did. And still, there are times when we're in our better boat, and I pull out a giant screwdriver and right in the bottom of that thing, right? Now there's a hole in this boat, and then I got to go patching that thing up. Sometimes whenever doing this, I feel very self-conscious about it not being the Jason show. Hey, let's just talk about all the blue ribbon for Jason. I feel very self-conscious about that because if you could live at my house for 3 weeks, you would know that blue ribbon went through the shredder. There's just this sense today, and this shifted for me somewhere in early years of recovery. I don't remember when. It's not like there's a magic moment. It just shifted for me that the boat that I'm patching, the water that I'm scooping, is the water of my brokenness. It's the boat of my own brokenness. And like, that doesn't stop. That doesn't stop if she loves me and cares for me and respects me and is sweet to me today. Or if she divorces tomorrow. I don't want that. God forbid. That's the last thing in the world I want. Right? But even if it doesn't change, like the way that I treat her, and again, God forbid, I'm not going down this path. The way that I treat her when we're 3 years removed from divorce and are exchanging kid drop-off, like, that's still a function of who God is calling me to be. Right? That doesn't change because she left or stayed. Right? This stuff over here where we're talking about, like, what if she doesn't buy it? It's like, if I'm doing it because I'm called to it, if I'm doing it because that's who God is developing me into, she doesn't have to buy it. Because at some point, the Holy Spirit will work in her spirit so she can't help but buy it. She just can't help it. Right? There's like this thing that happens where in recovery, oftentimes we lose sight, as husbands speak, we lose sight, or sometimes we never take hold of, but we lose sight of, like, this is really what's driving. This is ultimately what will make the difference. Your own inner work of, and I say inner work of asking that question, like, who do I believe I am called to be? Like, who do I want to be? Who like, there's an internal part of that is you coming to terms with what you believe for yourself. There are some of us who, if we do that work, we're going to go, I believe I am called to not be a jerk, and that's about where it ends. And we've never conceptualized that actually I've set the bar for myself really low. Like, not being a jerk is a pretty low bar. So first, it's just like the coming to terms of what our own internal belief about ourselves is. And I go back to that. That's where I was when I'm talking divorce with those guys, right? I'm in that place of, like, I'm doing pretty well. I'm trying really hard over here. And the truth was, I was doing a pretty darn good job. Like, I wasn't popping off and saying hurtful things, right? I was doing a pretty good job. And I was doing exactly that, a good job. Right? That's where the miss was. So first is that internal thing. And maybe I got 3 answers. First is the internal thing. Second is putting yourself around people who believe that for themselves. So I think it's really hard to internalize that when the people around you haven't internalized that. Right? And I mean, we know this across the board. The Bible talked about this a long time ago, that you are the company that you keep. And then, I don't remember who it is, some business guru said, you're the sum total of the 5 people that you hang out with the most. My dad used to say, birds of a feather flock together. You get the point. It's like being around some other people who've internalized that. I don't know that you just osmote it, but something happens in that where you start to see some of the application. That was true for me. Being around a couple of guys who have internalized that, even though they wouldn't have even articulated it that way, that started to make a difference. Third thing is, and I don't want this to be trite or, I'm not trying to dodge, is like, that's one-on-one work with you and God. That's you waking up every morning and going, okay, God, who are you calling me to be today? And then somebody cuts you off in traffic. You're like, son of a... Oh, God's calling me to be humble and forgiving. Okay, check. Right? Like that. That's a personal thing between you and God. Again, I don't want that to sound dodgy, but that's the truth, in my opinion. Redefining. I mean, all of those steps are applicable, but I think about, like, redefining, like, there, for some of us, man, I'm gonna get on a soapbox. We have come, we wouldn't say it this way. I'm just speaking for husbands here. We wouldn't say it, this is some wives too. We wouldn't say it this way. We wouldn't articulate it this way. We wouldn't define it this way. But operationally, the way we're living is, I accept you when you're at your best. I love you when you're at your best. And I reject you when you're at your worst. For a lot of us as husbands, that's operationally how we're living with our wives. When you're at your best, we're good. When you're at your worst, and listen, for wives, when they hear that, they internally they know that operating system. For most wives, it jumps to, so when I'm at my worst, you'll cheat on me, or you'll act out, or you'll fill in the blank there with something that's very, very damaging. That's where most wives' heads will go in that space. But operationally, that's the way we're living. It's a different thing to repent of that and come to this place where we redefine, who is God calling me to be? God is calling me to be, and again, with some one-on-one work with God, God is calling me to be the kind of person, the kind of man who loves her when she's at her worst. Maybe more so than when she's at her best. Like there's a redefinition that happens in this when we sort of like start to allow ourselves, again through that work, to believe in who God is calling us to be. And we start to believe that that's more and more like Christ. We start to see that like it's so much more in the redefinition. It's so much more than the knots and don'ts. Y'all heard me talk about this on a webinar recently. It's so much more than the knots and don'ts. It's on the becoming, right? It's like, I think about this with empathy. Guys will say, guys will ask the question like, okay, when she says this and she does that, and I'm really trying to practice empathy, and how do I do that? How do I have empathy when she's yelling and accusing me of things I didn't do? That's a very common refrain. And it's like, if what you're trying to do is empathy in that moment, it's probably not going to go very well. But if you've bought into, if your belief system is that God is calling you to become an empathetic person, you'll engage all the other hours outside of the one where she's yelling in a very different way. Or become. Right, some of that redefinition, so I'm tying it back to what you were saying, Mike, some of that redefinition is about not just the knots and don'ts, it's about becoming whatever the opposite of that would be. I'm encouraging all of us as a part of our Back to Basics work to spend some time in the journal this week and go, who's God calling me to be? Who do I really believe God is calling me to be? And am I open to that? Am I open to who he's calling? Like, do I want to become who he's calling me to be? Because all I really want is peace. If I could just get to peace, then don't get me started. I think it's a good exercise for all of us to come back to those basics. And I think for some of us, there's a whole new level of recovery that we have access to when we make that shift. There's some of us who were slogging it out and just like in the grind. And when we get a hold of that, it's going to like raise our recovery to something that we didn't know it could be. And we're going to experience it very differently, less as a slog and a grind, and more of a journey of becoming who God has called me to be, which has a whole lot, not that it's about the benefit, but it's got a whole lot more benefit to it than I'm doing this because she needs me to.